Hello and welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch. I'm your YouTube friend Brad, and thank you for joining me. More Howard Stern content coming your way. I promise. Keep subscribing, keep commenting. I will have some new Howard Stern interviews coming. I promise they're going to be good. You're going to love them. You'll be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe Brad got that guy. But yes, going to continue doing that, but also I like to branch out and do some WWE stuff. I like to talk sports here. So today, I'm very excited. I'm going to talk it over with Brother Love. Of course, you know him better as Bruce Prichard nowadays. Something to Wrestle With is the podcast him and Conrad do, and they do a wonderful job. So if you come here looking for Howard Stern stuff, but now you're like, oh, Brad's also doing wrestling interviews. This is great. I'm a big fan of the WWE, was a huge fan in the 80s, loved it in the 90s, huge fan of Brother Love. And so I had some problems with our video connection here, so we're going to go ahead and just start this interview audio only, but you'll get to see some moving pictures along the way. And let me say hello, Bruce.
Well, hello, Brad.
And it's Bruce, but everyone knows you as Brother Love. I mean, this is exciting for me as a kid growing up. I'm looking at Brother Love right there. You don't have the red face, but can we get a little Brother Love? Maybe I love you.
No, Brother Love's dead. No. I love you.
This is, like I said, a big thrill. I grew up watching you, and I was just a huge fan of the wrestling in the 80s. And you now do a podcast called Something to Wrestle With. I found this thing, and I love podcasts. Obviously, I do one myself, but I'm always looking for other ones to listen to. This one I have binged listened to. So sometimes you guys will go 2 hours, 3 hours on just a specific topic, like Mega Powers. You did a whole thing on Macho Man and Hulk and how the feud was built up. Or you'll do something with Bret Hart's Montreal Screwjob, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But you were with the WWF from basically 87 to 2008 with a couple stints not there. But tell me a little bit about your podcast and how much fun you're having. Conrad does a great job setting you up and researching. But this is, like I said, if you're a wrestling fan of the 80s, 90s, even today, there's so much good stuff in there.
Well, you know, we did this thing, and it was something I had to be talked into doing. Conrad and I are friends and work in the mortgage business together. He owns a mortgage business, and I'm in it. You can go over to savewithbruce.com, and we can help save you some money on your mortgage. But we would be at his house, and we would start talking about different things and hang out like a couple of old women and just watch TV, watch our favorite shows. We would start talking about wrestling and different things. When he brought up, you know, hey, this would be a podcast, some of the stories you tell. I said, well, you can chalk that up to something that's never going to happen. From there, he kept on me, and eventually I gave in and said I'd do it, but I didn't want to do the traditional podcast where you interview a guest and have to track down 52 people a year to make your show. And he said, no, you'll just tell old stories. And we started picking topics. Since then, we've grown to where we allow our audience to choose the topics. We give them 4 topics to choose from. They can go to facebook.com/something to wrestle, and they can participate in a poll to choose the topics for the next show. And that's what we do. So our audience dictates what we talk about, and they can ask us questions on Facebook, on Twitter, and we kind of respond directly to them. There's times like right now where we are we're picking some anniversaries because there's some huge anniversaries coming up, and we're going to pick them. And this week we're going to talk about Bret Hart and Survivor Series anniversaries coming up, the 30-year anniversary of that. So it's we try to listen to our audience, but we essentially, they told us don't go over an hour. They said it's guest driven. Told us don't plug your stuff up top. Every rule that they don't cuss, every rule that they gave us, we essentially broke.
Yeah, I love it.
And since then, we've been breaking rules, and we've been breaking numbers too, download numbers. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, and it's so detail oriented. It's just it's just great how, like I said, you pick a topic and literally go day by day. So we'll get more into your podcast and some of your favorite episodes, but I have my own questions too. So this is great because now I've listened to almost as much as I possibly could. I'm like, well, here's something I want to know. But let me, just for our audience here this is a Baseball and Beyond is the name of the podcast. So we're going beyond, obviously. Tell everybody just a little bit about your background, how you end up in the WWF in 1987, and then how you kind of force your way in to become Brother Love, and then basically you're Vince McMahon's right-hand man for a good 20 years over there.
Well, all I've ever wanted to do was be in the wrestling business since I was 4 years old, and we started out loving the business, watching the business, and loving wrestling. When I was 10 years old, I had the ability to sell posters at the local wrestling events here in Houston, Texas for the promoter Paul Bosch. And I did that for many years. My brother Tom also always wanted to be in wrestling. He took pictures and he did we both were those two kids that were around that did any and everything that it took to be around the business. We were willing to participate and we were willing to do the things that other guys didn't want to do. Well, kids didn't want to clean up. We would clean up. People didn't want to set up the ring. We'd set up the ring. And when you do the things nobody else wants to do, you also get to do the things that you want to do. So we busted our ass, and I was the assistant director of the TV show when I was 12. When I was 14, I was ring announcing. 16, I was refereeing. And 18, I was running the place. And when I was 24, I made the call to New York and to Vince McMahon, and we talked, and the rest, as they say, is history. And when I started there, I didn't even have a job. I didn't have a job description, let's put it that way. It was come on in, find a place, and see where your talents fit the best, and we'll go from there. And I ended up in the television end.
So how do you force your way into a Brother Love character? I know you've told the story where you just kind of barge in a meeting, but where was the behind-the-scenes stuff for you? Were you thinking, man, I would like to be on TV. I'd like to be a character. Let me show Vince what I can do, because it's pretty much that's what you did. You run in and you do this televangelist character in a meeting, and Vince is like, let's do it. Yeah,
and it was... it was an accumulation of things where I always did this character, the Southern evangelist, and brothers and sisters and hallelujah, and I would break into this Southern evangelist character, if you will, all the time on the road. So it wasn't new to Vince, but what was new to him was the twist I put on it, and I said, hey, we need to do this, and I could basically, we don't have a Piper's Pit type segment right now. What if I filled that void? And it's a heel. And he loved the idea. He said, find me somebody to do it. And I said, you don't need anybody. It's me. I would do it. He said, I can't do it with that damn face, pal. And I said, okay. So I showed him how I could do it. And went into his office. Well, he was in with the CFO and the head of our international touring, and walked in cold, went right into my bit, laid hands upon all three of them, and just turned around and walked out. Never broke character, and walked out and went back to my office. And he called and said, all right, let's take a look at it. And basically we did a screen test in the studio and went from there.
You're in that, like Bobby. I remember as a kid, I didn't really. You're supposed to hate Bobby Heenan, but I don't know. I laughed, but man, Brother Love, he really made me angry. Just as a kid, you had real heat.
Well, thank you. I'm glad.
That's what you're supposed to do as a bad guy.
Exactly.
So Vince McMahon, you go in there and you're kind of working on the creative team and the TV and all these different things. Tell me a little bit about just Vince McMahon in the late 80s, early 90s, and kind of coming up with these storylines, because these storylines as a kid, Macho Man and Hulk, they basically, it was sort of this cycle where after WrestleMania, Hulk would kind of do a movie, and then around summer he'd kind of find a new friend like Paul Orndorff, and then Orndorff would turn on him, and then Andre would turn on him, and then Macho Man. So you had this sort of this running way of getting to WrestleMania, but tell me a little bit about how Vince planned these things out in advance, and it just every time it worked.
Yeah, it also makes you wonder what kind of guy Hulk Hogan is that all of his friends turn their back on him. What the hell?
Well, it's funny. It's funny. There is, I think, a YouTube clip or somebody who explains, wait, the Hulk Hogan was the bad guy in that feud. He kept trying to steal Elizabeth away. He's touching her. Macho Man's just sticking up for his woman, which I love that theory, that if you could play this back and go, hey, Hulk Hogan's the bad guy there.
Right, but he was just so loved, and no matter what he did, he could do no wrong. And that actual storyline in particular was meticulously laid out for a year, in that we had all these nuances that we knew, and we never really let anybody else really in on it, other than make sure you get this shot.
We'll just throw out a Steve Austin versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14? 1998, I know, is the year. But so we're coming off the Bret Hart thing, and you got Austin's white hot and DX. When does now we're talking about Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels? How early into that? Because like I said, it's now you've got these Monday night shows where you got to figure out how to. Back in the 80s, you didn't have to. You had superstars, but Hulk Hogan would show up maybe once every 3 months. Here you have Austin and Shawn Michaels showing up every week, so you got to really figure out how to keep these guys away from each other, but still, build for that WrestleMania. So how hard is that, and how do you kind of lay that out?
Well, that one was actually fairly easy because Shawn had a back issue, and Shawn wasn't able to work. We were hoping we were going to get that one last match out of him. So we wanted to make sure to keep him healthy for WrestleMania. So that part was easy. The temptation, even if it was there, it couldn't have happened. But the storyline in general there was more about anointing Steve Austin as the guy, as the next big guy that we were going to go with. And we knew that that's where we wanted to get. Everything else was circumstantial. So you wanted to get to Steve Austin, and you wanted to get to him being your main attraction, and that's what we were working towards, much more so than a Shawn and Steve angle or issue. It was all about crowning Steve as the new champion going forward.
So going backwards, if you look at like WrestleMania 8, it looked like, for all intents and purposes, it's going to be Hogan versus Flair, and they do this round the world, 3-match program where they're doing the shows in St. Louis and New York and different type. But then we get to January and February, and everything changes, and Sid comes along, and now Randy Savage is going to face Flair. So just tell me a little bit about how that all changed, because it's to the random fan, it sounded like it was going to be Hogan Flair, and it just changed.
Well, I think that the hardcore fan, if you will, probably felt that that's what they wanted to see. And I'm not sure that Vince was sold on the Hogan Flair attraction, because he put it out there. They did a test on it and threw it out in major markets to see if people would pay money and come out and see the Hogan Flair. But at the same time, they didn't have a lot of build-up for it either. But it didn't draw. And Vince was a little gun-shy about putting Hogan and Flair on top in WrestleMania, because the audience had been conditioned for Hulk to slay the monster, to go after the big bad heel. And Vince didn't feel that Ric Flair fit that bill as the big bad heel at that time.
Tell me a little bit about just working with Vince, because I find him to be the most creative to do this as long as he has, and to literally take WrestleMania 1 and say, here, I'm going to put my whole company, my whole life is going to be on this one show. It works. And then he has the Silver Dome and 93,000 WrestleMania 3. Tell me a little bit about just Vince and just his genius, and just kind of being around, seeing how his mind works, because he literally was the guy making every call. He had you and Pat Patterson and other guys kind of saying, we like this, we like that, but literally Vince goes, no. I love your Vince McMahon impression too, by the way, so maybe we'll get one of those.
Well, he's got coconut balls, and he's not afraid of anything. So he's willing to take chances, and he's willing to get out there, but he has a vision. And I've heard, it's funny, I've heard since I started, and since Vince really started his expansion, he's lost it. He's not in touch with the audience. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And I've heard that since 1983. When I went there in 87, everybody told me his best years are behind him. He doesn't have a clue what the hell's going on today. He's lost it. All the way through, 22 years of being there, there was always that undercurrent of Vince doesn't have a clue what the hell he's doing. And yet he was thinking 10, 15, 20 years ahead at that time. So when I hear that, I just kind of chuckle to myself, because if people had heard him in early 1990 talking about him having his own network, and that we would have our own network one time where all it is all of our own programming, and we would just be creating program for this network, and we would take our old footage, and that would have a home where people could watch it anytime they wanted. He didn't know that he was describing the WWE network at the time, but he was. And when people, laughed at him for going into Pontiac Silverdome and 93,000 people, he just told them, fill it. There wasn't a how do we do it or anything else like that. It was fill it. And I'm going to give you the attraction. Now go sell the tickets for it. People thought he was nuts. But he's crazy like a fox, and he does know what the hell he's doing in that regard, and that he thinks it out. He may not have the minute details of a lot of it, but he knows where he wants to go to, and he knows pretty much how to get there. So,
like I said, you do these great impressions. I think everyone saw it in the Beyond the Mat documentary where he has who's the guy who's going to puke? His name is Puke. He's gonna give me a little Vince McMahon. Maybe not doing that scene, but somewhere where you get to do your Vince McMahon impression. I'm trying to think of something you did on your podcast, but I can't remember a good one. You got a good one? I
think the best for anybody that's been around Vince is pronouns, pal. God damn it, who the hell is he? Give me names. And that was a pet peeve of his, especially when you're telling stories. The announcer would go, he just took him over, and who the hell is he? And it's, when you think about it, and it's funny, I have a t-shirt thing, over at BrucePrichard.com. One of my t-shirts is pronouns, pal. And the people that order it, it's always funny because I call them and I thank them for placing an order and everything. And the ones that get the pronouns, pal, are usually teachers or students. And I'll have an English teacher who will say, yep, I'm always on my kids all the time, pronouns. So that's one of my favorite Vinceisms. Or, God damn it, I can't be on TV if I'm dead.
Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, probably my two favorites as a kid. Do you have any great Randy Savage story? And I love the way you tell the story about him and Hulk, kind of not too close, brother. But maybe it's just that angle, that how they made that thing work so big that WrestleMania 5 is one of the biggest of all time.
Well, it was real. It was a story that everybody could identify with, whether you're on either side of it. It was also something females could identify with. But every guy felt that jealous feeling, either lost a girlfriend or a wife or what have you. And there's also the guy that's been wrongly accused. And I think that there were so many different sides to that story that they had no choice. I mean, it was easy to identify with, and people could totally relate to that story, and they wanted to see it. So it all works.
And was he crazy? I mean, he seemed just crazy, but crazy like a fox kind of crazy.
Randy Savage?
Yes.
First name Macho, last name Man. Yeah. He's he was intense.
Yeah, I could see that. Andre the Giant, any great Andre? I mean, I know we always hear these stories about him drinking, 3 bottles of wine just to get, unloosed. But do you have a favorite travel story with the big man?
Probably the best one is one Bobby Heenan used to tell Andre, being on a plane and goes to sit down in first class, and he's messing with the chair, and the flight attendant asks him, "Can I get you something?" He says, "Screwdriver." And she leaves, and she's bringing everybody else their drinks, and finally she comes up to Andre and hands him a Phillips head screwdriver. And he says, "What's this?" And she says, "Well, you asked for a screwdriver." And he holds it, looks at it, and says, "What would you have brought me if I asked for Bloody Mary?"
And we'll get back to stories with Brother Love, a.k.a. Bruce Prichard. It's so awesome to really talk to this guy and get some stories from him. And he was Vince McMahon's right-hand man for so many years, so I hope you're enjoying this. We'll talk about Bret Hart, the Hart Foundation, and some of those moments with Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was there for all that. And but, I have to talk about Massa's, my favorite restaurant in all of St. Louis, the title sponsor. They put up big bucks to be the title sponsor of Baseball and Beyond, so I'm going to stop down right here, talk about them just for a little bit, and then I'll get back to the interview. It's massasstl.com. That's the website. 5 locations in St. Louis. That website will show you the menus and the locations and how to get there, and they're just delicious food. But let's get back to Bruce as we're going to move into some of the mid-'90s stuff and pretty controversial times back then. Here's Bruce and I with that conversation. All right, so let's move on to kind of the mid-'90s. This is when wrestling is just probably at its peak. You've got 2 companies drawing big numbers, but I think everybody loved what, I was watching, I think, more WCW, or I can't remember how I was doing this. I was recording one and watching the other, but Bret Hart in 1997 was fascinating. He obviously wanted to be a babyface, or it seemed like that, and he just wasn't having that happen, and then he turned. But then he does this crazy, you guys see this crazy angle where he's cheered vociferously in Canada, just booed to the hilt in America, and it's just one of the greatest angles ever. But I think I've heard you guys say it kind of was, it wasn't planned that way, right?
Well, no, it was, again, that's a perfect example of listening to your audience. And Bret was so damn popular in Canada, it's just ask Bret himself. He'll tell you he was a Canadian hero. And they loved him there. He walked on water there. He was Bret Hart. So in the States, the more he would talk about Canada, the more people would kind of throw him up. So I thought that was, pretty cool. And they were digging his stuff, and it was just a natural, simple rivalry that people dug.
So I've always wondered this myself. This is why I'm so excited to have you on. So they make Bret the champion somewhere in September, October-ish, and then they pull the big long contract that everyone knows about. He was getting like a 20-year contract, and they pull it. So I was just curious. I mean, there was seemingly a little bit of not knowing what was going to happen with Bret in July, August, September. What was the reasoning for putting the championship on him when maybe this was at the hill? I mean, if Vince knew 2 months away that he needed to get rid of that 20-year contract, why would you have him be the champion so that what happens at Survivor Series happens where you have to screw him, basically?
Well, we didn't really know. And again, I think that narrative gets misconstrued a lot because Vince really wanted Bret to stay. He wanted Bret to stay and be able to say, "Hey, Bret, will you stay for less money up front? Can we do something different?" At the same time, Bret was talking about a money offer from WCW that was more than double what he was making with us. And that was a ton of money. And Vince didn't want to be responsible and feel that he was in the way of Bret making all this money because Bret kept bringing it up. Hey, they've offered me X amount of money. They've offered me X amount of money. So Vince thought he was doing Bret a favor by letting him go. Go ahead. You know what? I'm not going to hold you to this 20-year contract. We can afford it up front. But if you want to go and you want to go make that money, I'm not going to stand in your way. Go do it.
But he's still, he is the champion. How is there any talk about?
There was, I think,
stay, right?
In Vince's head, he was hoping that Bret would stay, and Bret would come back and say, "No, you know what? I'll stay here, and this is where I want to be." Bret was saying both things.
Yeah,
it's difficult.
It's the most talked about angle, definitely in the WWF. This thing has happened before, where there's what they call screw jobs. But if fans don't know, Bret goes into this match thinking that something else is going to happen. And then basically Vince McMahon and Shawn and a few others basically say, he has the belt and he's leaving the next day. So there's always this plan. Tell me a little bit about that couple 48 hours, 72 hours going into that Montreal show where it's him and Shawn Michaels. And it's just the storyline behind the storyline is great because Bret and Shawn don't get along. They've had fights throughout this feud that they're having, but this is real life stuff actually happening while we're watching the kind of the choreographed stuff in the ring. I think it's the greatest thing that could ever happen.
It just worked out that way. Deep down, I think that everybody involved probably hopes that it wouldn't have happened, and feeling that Bret would have done the right thing and that he would have gone out and done business and not had the machinations that we had to go through to get to that match and finally have to do that. So it was unfortunate, but you have to do what you have to do to protect your company.
And there's this great documentary that Bret Hart had a company come in. And again, I was just curious about this. So I guess Vince just trusts Bret enough because we don't see many behind-the-scenes camera crews that don't work for the WWE back behind there. But Wrestling with Shadows is this documentary that basically chronicles this Bret Hart's 1997 year. How did that get cleared? And, and basically, how does Vince say, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that, Bret?
Well, it was also something that was done in conjunction with the company, and it had been in the works for a long time, long before all this Bret controversy had even started. They just fell into something. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And they made a story out of this controversy with the documentary. But that was something that had been endorsed by the company and something that we had done through our Canadian offices. And Carl DeMarco, who was the head of the Canadian promotion. So it wasn't like, okay, hey guys, come on in. We don't have anything about it. It was, they're here and they captured it. We were hoping that it wouldn't come to what it came to.
It seems like going back just through your career there, but as me as a fan, I remember there was basically 5-year swings where, 1987, you guys bring in DiBiase and Rick Rude and Ultimate Warrior and Demolition and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and One Man Gang, and then they kind of fade out. And in 1992, we get Razor Ramon and Tatanka, and then we get to 96, 97. Now we're building Austin and Rock. I mean, is it just sort of that's how the wrestling business was then? And also for you, do you have a favorite period that you had during your time there?
You have cycles in the business, and I know it's funny, Vince McMahon always hated this analogy, but it's true. The business cycles, and you kind of go through these waves of different scenarios and different types of talent, and your audience gets tired of the same thing. If you feed them rice every day, after a while, they're going to want chocolate. So you have to continually change, and you have to continually adapt and grow, or else your business gets gobbled up. So it just was a changing of the times, and people had seen the big monsters, they had seen the cartoon characters, for lack of a better term, and they were looking for more athletic and a different product. And it's kind of gone back and forth, and it's evolved over time.
And I look at today's stuff, and I know you're not there now, so I don't know if you even care to comment, but it just seems like I understand you can't have the Jake the Snake Roberts with a snake and the $1 Million Man with the $1 Million belt, and everyone has this niche, Doink the Clown characters, but I felt like Steve Austin was a kick-ass, badass character. Rock was this quick-talking, funny guy character. Triple H was. It just feels like now Roman Reigns is I'm Roman Reigns, and John Cena is John Cena. Like the characters aren't really built or clearly defined, maybe, or maybe that Steve and The Rock were just so good at doing what they did. Is that am I right about that? And it's possibly why I don't watch anymore, because it just feels like, well, The Miz is The Miz and Chris Jericho is Chris Jericho. I mean, Jericho has character a little bit, but does it make sense?
It does, but I think people can make the same argument. Well, Steve Austin was just Steve Austin, but he turned the volume up so that you got Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that character of who Steve Austin is, that's just who he is in real life. And John Cena, you're seeing who he is in real life. The audience, I think, kind of wanted a more realistic character than for example, a Doink the Clown. But then at the same time, they want their Undertakers.
Yeah, Bray Wyatt, Bray Wyatt still does something different, and it feels like you could get a few more niche type. I don't even know what they'd be. I always had this idea that you get a guy that's, when you had this Trump-Hillary thing, you get the politics going, and you have a feud of a Trump supporter and a Hillary supporter. People would have loved that, right? That's my guest booking of the day.
I think so, but at the same time, politics are tough. Politics are really, really tough. And while you used to have characters, your bad guys were the Russians and the Japanese and whoever that America had been at war with. But even America is so divided right now that if you were to have an ISIS character or a Taliban character, I don't know that they would be accepted, even to be booed.
Yeah. Well, they did that
in this arena like they were in the past.
And they did that with Davari, I guess, in 2005, and the Hulkster took him out back then. So it was kind of rough. So let me, as we're wrapping up, just again, I'm a huge Vince McMahon guy. Do you have you worked there so long with him, and I feel like you still have some great feelings about him, even though you haven't been there in a long time. But do you have a great memory, a story, things about the Vince that maybe you would like people to know?
I think that the whole thing with Vince, the real Vince McMahon is truly a good person, and I believe that. He's a genius, bona fide genius. He's the closest thing to genius I've ever seen in my life. And that's on a daily basis. He doesn't just have moments of it. He is that person, the hardest working guy I've ever been around in my life. And I think his exterior is one of a hard ass, extremely intimidating, but he's Vince McMahon, and I guess he can get away with it. But everything that you see on screen is him in real life. At the same time, what you don't see on screen is a pretty kind, really good-hearted, good person, and a business genius. So he's done it all. He's continuing to innovate and create new things. And he'll be in the business till the day he dies.
And till the day he dies. It seems like Stephanie and Triple H are kind of the guys taking over, and you worked with the writing team. Just talk about how writing's different now, where they kind of went. It seemed like when they did their IPO and kind of went public, it seemed like things changed, and they couldn't do the racy stuff anymore. Obviously, you don't see people bleeding. You don't see many chair shots anymore. But also, they brought in a lot of Hollywood writers, and just tell me a little bit about how it changed. The way things went there in the early 2000s and basically to now, right now.
Well, you look at the product and you look at the amount of product that they're producing now. From a 3-hour Raw, a 2-hour SmackDown, NXT, and all the other programming that they have to produce, there's quite a bit. And the level of detail that goes into it is much more than it was before. I'm not a big fan personally of the multiple writers, but I think if you have 3 or 4 working on it, hey, good. 15, maybe a little overkill, but I'm not there, so it's kind of hard for me to give you a good opinion based on working there. But I think that's the way the business is going, and they do a lot more than just write the TV, and they're constantly going and constantly creating and producing. So it's the most unenviable task and job in the industry, and they all work hard. So it's just a different time, In our day, we did wrestling angles. There were 3 of us. It was me, Vince McMahon, and Pat Patterson. So we did wrestling angles, and that's what we did.
Yeah. And I'm not as plugged in as I once was, and I still kept an eye on it over the last 10 years or so, but there is this feeling, it seems like, where a Batista wins the Royal Rumble as a surprise guest, and the fans just boo him. And then Daniel Bryan doesn't win, and the fans go ballistic. And they'll say, well, at the end, he did get his WrestleMania win. But you see it with Roman Reigns, where the fans they just aren't connecting. But that's part of what, I'm just curious of how it works, where you had a Hulk Hogan and people loved him. It seemed like it was just easier. Hey, Hulk's going to overcome. Now they'll try to build a guy, and it's either not working or they're going to throw him, down your throat like a Batista back then or Roman Reigns now. I know
we did that, and that's you're making the point exactly. We did that. We did that with Hulk. We did that with Bret. We did that with Steve. We did that with Rock, and now they want something else. So you're gonna. You give them something else, and I think that they still are responding to Brock. And I bet you by the time it's his time, they're going to be ready for Roman Reigns all over again. And I think that I look at him, and he's got everything. He has all the tools, and he will be the guy. And he is the guy by you just listen to the reaction from the audience. Whether they're booing him or cheering him, they're reacting to him.
That's true. There is that. So you've done 70 plus Something to Wrestle With. That's your podcast. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of it. Do you have, it's your own podcast, so it's hard to probably pick a favorite. It's like children, I'm sure. But do you have one that you look back at going, well, that was fun to think back about that? Or like I said, Conrad, your host, literally has day by day matches and how many people were there and what happened at the tapings. Tell me a little bit about, do you have a favorite one that you look back at and say, wow, that was great? My
favorite one is still the Houston wrestling one, just because it was just more heartfelt, and it was actually one Conrad didn't want to do, lost every poll. But it was something we did at his bonus show, and the audience responded hugely. One of our most downloaded shows, and they loved it. So that was one for me. That was my favorite one to do.
Yeah, like I said, I love it. Something to Wrestle With is the podcast. Find it on iTunes. And then you also, you're on Twitter, you're selling T-shirts, you have Facebook, you're multimedia. Tell us anything else you'd like people to know before we wrap up here.
Well, hey, man, everything. Just every Friday over at somethingtowrestle.com, you can download our show. And if you'd like a great shirt, go on over to brucepritchard.com. Follow me on Twitter at Bruce Prichard. The show is at Prichard Show. My co-host, Conrad Thompson, is at Hey It's Conrad. And Facebook.com/Something to Wrestle is where you can get a brand new feature every single day at 6 a.m. It's The Morning Deuce with Bruce Prichard, and I spend a couple minutes, just come out to my office and get on this old video camera thing here and do 2 minutes on whatever the hell. The last few have been all about Diddy trying to steal the Brother Love name. But we'll be picking a lot of different current topics, and it'll be different than the podcast is now.
So you're out of the wrestling business, but not really. I mean, you're out of the WWF, but you're really...
Every time you get out, they pull you back in.
And tell our fans from Brother Love how much you love them.
I love you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Love you.
Fun reminiscing about wrestling from 1997 to 2008 there with Bruce Prichard, a.k.a. Brother Love. Once again, great podcast if you're into that. Something to Wrestle With is what it's called. And they just literally take a topic and just run through that year or years. And it's just fun if you love that 80s stuff or even the 90s stuff back in the day. So I really appreciate Brother Love coming on the show. I'll tell you what, we're having some fun here during these winter months on Baseball and Beyond, presented by Masses Restaurants. It's time where we go beyond, We do baseball a lot during the summer, and we'll get back into baseball here once we flip the calendar, but just having some fun talking with other people that I grew up watching and enjoying, and appreciate these folks coming on and being part of the big podcast here, Baseball and Beyond, presented by Masses Restaurants. Did I tell you about Masses Restaurants? 5 locations in St. Louis. And massesstl.com is the website. You can find the menus. You can find directions, locations, all that good stuff. Go tell them your podcast friend, Brad, sent you. And on iTunes, give me a good review. Go in there and say, wow, we love this podcast. We want more. We want to see it on the charts. We want to see it grow and be big and all that good stuff. I'm here just having fun, interviewing people that I enjoy, and that's what I do. Hopefully you enjoy it as well. That's going to do it for today's episode. Keep listening, and I'll bring you some new stuff here coming up soon.